All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of Lifting, Running, and Living with your favorite coaches, Kelly.
Hello.
Hey, and JK. That's me. All right, we are kicking off episode number 40 of
Yeah.
LRL. Yeah,
I
every
still can't
episode. I'm
say
like,
LRL
wow.
very well.
Yeah,
I get
it's
really tongue
still,
tied.
it's still so close to LOL. Yeah,
It really is.
and then TRL, Total Request Live, back in the day on MTV. That
A
was
classic.
yes. What, Carson Daly? Was that the dude?
Carson
That was the dude,
Daly,
right?
yeah.
That
Yeah.
was the show. It was, well,
Yeah.
it was that show, and then on BET there was 106 in Park. 106 in Park was
I don't know
the
what that
show.
is.
That was the show. It's all good. That
I'll
was
trust
like
you.
the ultimate. Okay. Just take my word for it. All right.
Yeah.
So, per the usual, let's kick it off with updates. So, Kelly,
Yeah.
what have you been up to?
Okay. So I've got some gym updates.
Hey, okay.
Yeah. And some of it's not what you would think. But first, I added 3 new things to my gym. I don't think I mentioned this first one. I got this a little while ago, but I just never brought it up. I got a standard bar, so a 20 kilogram bar.
Okay.
Yeah, I was getting kind of sick of my lighter one. It just felt weird in my hands. I don't know. So now I'm back to just using a standard bar, even though I got...
Subtle flex. I was tired of that baby bar.
I have small hands, so it doesn't make sense, but I don't know. Probably just like lifting with the normal or standard bar for so long that it
Okay.
feels more natural. Anyway,
Cool.
so I got that. And then this past week, because Black Friday deals, obviously, have been all over, I got a new bench because my one...
Oh.
Yeah, my one, it did its job, but it was not sturdy at all. And I wanted to feel a little sturdier because I do like you sit on the bench, you lay on the bench and do exercises, but I also stand on the bench and do exercises, and standing got a little sketchy sometimes.
Oh, like step ups and stuff like that?
Yeah.
You do? Okay. Gotcha. I didn't know if from a stability standpoint you were talking like, you were bench pressing and feeling like you were having to like balance
No,
at the same.
not like
Okay.
that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And with like hip thrusts, I had to have it against something or it would just move backwards. Which
Yeah.
obviously you don't want that as you're trying to hip thrust.
No.
You need your back support. So I got that. And then I also got a wooden box that is 16, 20, and 24 inches. So
Okay.
yeah, they're going to be my step up things now, which, even more stability.
Yes.
And then eventually I'll start jumping on the box is the plan.
Man,
Box
nice.
jumps. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
props
really
on the
crowded.
gym upgrades.
It's crowded in there now, but it's worth it. It feels so much better. Swapping out the bench was just, I don't know. I never knew how much I needed a more stable bench until I got one. And then this is the part you're not expecting. I joined a Globo Gym.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It was
Yeah.
literally the other day.
What's the story
Monday.
behind that?
My stupid foot. And I want it's okay. So it's kind of annoying. I did it on Sunday because we were supposed to record, and then I was like, I'll make my decision after we record. And then obviously we moved our recording. We're recording on Wednesday for the listeners.
Yes.
But their Black Friday sale was ending with like the $0 enrollment fee. So I joined Vasa because yeah, my foot had been bothering me like quite a bit last week. And it seemed like I was just fighting it, trying to make running work, So I was like, I just need to accept I'm going to do some cross training. And obviously I have the bike here that I've talked about, but I want more options like an elliptical, Stairmaster, maybe like incline treadmill, whatnot. And just like get out of my house more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got that. And then the funny thing is my foot has felt a lot better this week.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So, but I'm excited to have more options. I haven't been yet. just by the nature of this week. But
Yeah.
I I have
Any
it.
intentions to do any lifting there also?
I'm gonna play that by ear
Okay.
because I like it. It'll depend when I can go. Because like if I'm gonna lift after work, I'm not going to Vasa. You know, I'm just gonna go out in my garage like at 5
Why?
p.m., 6
Is
p.m.
that based on like the crowd
I'm not.
slash
Yeah, the
timing?
crowd size.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not going at the busiest time to try to
You
lift
don't
when
want
I
to hang
have.
out with the broccoli bros?
No,
Aw. Snap.
not when I have my private space here. You know,
Yeah,
where
that's
like
understandable. Yeah.
unless I want to use machines that I don't have here,
Mm-hmm.
then it's like I don't really need to go there to lift. But
Gotcha.
I will go there at that hour to do some cardio, maybe some
Cool.
mobility on the little turf, you know?
Yeah, a little change of scenery.
see.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah. So
Cool.
those are my gym updates. And then my only other update for now is last year, I think I talked about this on here, we did the December bingo. And I brought it back
Yes.
this year by popular demand. So this is day 4. We're in day 4. I switched up some of the squares from last year and made them a bit harder. So everyone is excited. Should be fun.
Okay.
If anyone listening wants to join, DM me on Instagram and I'll give you the link.
I
And
like
it's free.
that. I
Yeah.
like that. I can throw out an endorsement for Kelly's bingo idea because I used that bingo idea periodically with my clients, my one-on-one clients, and
It's fun.
it was a hit. Yeah, it was a hit, and I enjoyed like making the bingo board too because it was nice to be able to think of like different ideas and stuff like that. You know, different levels of difficulty and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. I'd say from a creator point of view, one of the more difficult things was just trying to come up with some sort of like a harmony of things that are really difficult and
Yeah.
things that are just like should be about as easy as possible. So yeah, because you didn't want like an entire board of like, well, this next month is gonna suck versus then an
Yeah.
entire board of just like, okay, well, I can get this done in 3 days. Like I think I kind of skewed a little bit too easy. I remember I think the first time around where I was thinking it was going to take like a month and somebody was like, all right, it's been a week, I'm done. I'm like, oh, snap. So
Oh, see,
that
that's
was,
why
yeah.
in my bingo, you're only allowed to complete 1 square a day for that reason.
Ah, okay. Okay.
That's
Yeah,
what I
you're
say.
smart.
I mean,
You're
like
smarter
if
than
you
I am.
join
We
late,
know
I
that,
don't
but-
care. Yeah. But yeah, and then this year I tried to like not do as many training ones because a lot of people don't have a hard time with the training aspect, you know? So I
Yeah.
added a lot more. Like this year I added no social media for a day, which is going to be hard for a lot of people. Stuff like that. It's a lot more
Yeah.
like mental health and confidence squares, which people find really hard.
Ooh. All right. Well, that's a great advertisement. So DM Kelly
Yeah.
if you want to get a copy of the
Yeah.
bingo board.
DM me. We're all doing the easy squares this week, which is funny.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and when this comes out, I'll be at my parents' house in Maryland.
Yeah.
So, hi mom and
Oh,
dad.
cool. Hey.
Okay,
All
what's
right.
up with you?
Well, what is up with me? Two main things. Actually, three main things. So first, we're recording this on Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday, the 4th of December. So the holiday season from a retail standpoint has officially kicked off. So the week of Thanksgiving is referred to within my neck of the industry as Power Week. So that's when really things start to ramp up. So that is sorry, I'm working on getting Mace to bring it down a couple of levels because I can hear him clearly screaming.
I can hear him too.
Yeah. Can you hear him screaming, dead, dead? Yeah, don't worry, folks. If you can hear a child screaming dead in the background, just an average 12-year-old playing Fortnite. That's all.
Yeah.
So anyways, so last week was Power Week. So we are officially in the thick of it when it comes to the holiday season. So kicked that off. So what comes with that is typically Not necessarily a crazy schedule. It's more just unpredictability of the intensity because you're never fully aware of when things are going to get really busy and then when things are going to be a little bit on the lighter side, especially as e-commerce like continues to grow and grow and grow with, shipping products to home and then store pickups and different things like that. And then the main thing that I have continued to see evolve or devolve, it depending on how you look at it, over the now, gosh, I'm hitting 3 decades in the retail space at this point. Yeah, because I
Dang.
started when I was about 17, 18. Because my first job was not in retail; it was actually at a car wash. But
Oh.
yeah, so since about 17, I think actually. The thing that I've seen continue to transition is attitudes, just
Oh.
attitudes towards workers and employees and things like that and entitlement. It's been interesting to watch that. Again, more of like a recession, a regression, I should say, than
Yeah.
anything. So yeah, so we got that going on. So in the thick of it there. And then that also culminates with wrapping up fat loss. So I started my fat loss phase back in around the middle of August, initially intended to go about 7 to 8 weeks, decided to carry that through. When we scoped out, my coach and I had a final check-in as far as like the fat loss phase. We're still working together. However, doing our final check-in after the fat loss phase, really like scoping out and looking at like that half of August, then all of September, all of October, all of November, and then we wrapped up. Basically, the week of Thanksgiving is when we wrapped up. Really looking at it like October, that 4-ish weeks of October was more of maintenance than anything else. Like things stood kind of, I wouldn't even call it plateaued because I wasn't necessarily like really, really buckled down during the month of October. So October was more of like maintenance and then kind of re-engaged and refocused for the month of November. Accomplished, I'd say I accomplished close to about 80% success when it comes to what I was looking to get done from an aesthetic standpoint. Certainly not like disappointed or unhappy or anything like that. I think that as time went along, the main drivers that I had were no longer like the main drivers based on other things that were becoming more of a priority. So it was like caring about other things more than I cared about getting like a bit more leaner
Yeah.
than I was or that I am at the time and things like that. And that was a really good conversation that we had during one of our check-ins too, where with looking at like adherence and things like that, I was like, when it came down to it, there were particular moments where I decided like I was much more interested in paying attention to prioritizing like this thing than I was over this thing. And I think that's the reminder to folks that with anything that you're shooting for, it's all about understanding like what are you willing to sacrifice in order to get there. So
Yeah.
overall, I think I ended up down like I think I lost maybe about 13 pounds or something like that, somewhere around there. Which shook out to around where we were looking, maybe around where we were looking. We identified like a general range that we were kind of looking at, and
Yeah.
then we'll continue to likely be in a very, very slight deficit on average, but nowhere near like the deficit that I was in when I was like fully engaged in it. So that is wrapped up and good to go. And then the last update, and certainly not the least, at the time that this releases, so we release this episode on Friday, that's the 6th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this episode will come out on Friday the 6th, which is one day away from the closing of registration for the 9-week reset program that I am launching. So myself and a fellow coach, Anita, we are partnering up to do a 9-week reset program. And what we're going to be doing is we're focusing on 3 specific habits: eat well, sleep enough, exercise regularly. So that's part of the inspiration for the word reset, because in the middle of reset, like it's RESET. So ESE, E, eat well, S, sleep enough, E, exercise regularly. So that's in the middle
Oh,
of there. I know, crafty, isn't it?
I didn't even put
Hey,
that together.
I know. So that's why when I type it out, I do R and then in parentheses ESE and then T on the outside parentheses. I need to work with a graphic designer, clearly. So, so we're focused on kicking that off. That's going to be a small group training or small group coaching program. We're going to have a private community. We'll have 9 weeks of a training program available for you. We've got a private community for you. We've got all sorts of really cool things that are planned there. So I'm pretty excited about that kicking off, and we'll have details about that in the show notes. I just put out an episode. I actually just put out an episode of Help Me Understand. Episode 170 is all about the framework we're going to use for the program. So for anybody who'd like a more in-depth rundown, you can listen to episode of 170 of Help Me Understand. We're using a 4A framework. It's a framework I've used behind the scenes with clients for years now, and then am now going to be using it in this group format. So the 4A's are, first we do an assessment. So we spend time taking a look at where you currently are. Then second phase is awareness, where we actually go through like, hey, are you aware of these particular patterns that you have? From the awareness, we then move into action. So the actions that we're going to take, that's where you spend the majority of the time. And then basically, as you're going through those particular actions, we go into the last A, step 4, which is alignment. So constantly reviewing those actions to make sure, are they in alignment with not only your stated goals, but those actions are in alignment with the goals that you have, and being able to achieve those goals, those milestones, those checkpoints in a way that aligns with like what you actually value too. Because I think that's,
Ooh.
I think that's something, or not I think, I believe truly that that is one of, if not the most important key to sustainability and consistency, are the things that you're doing something that aligns with what actually matters to you. I think I used to talk so much, just like many people, I used to over-index so much on talking about, well, is this sustainable in terms of, talking about sustainability in terms of, are you going to be able to keep up this pace for forever? So it's like you can't always have your foot totally pressed down on the gas the entire time, right? And sometimes that conversation hits and sometimes it doesn't. But when you have a conversation with somebody with, is this sustainable, based on how it does or doesn't align with what will continue to be important to you, like relationships or whatever it may be, that question hits a little bit different. Because it's like a lot of people will white knuckle their way through things, but there's only so much that they're willing to sacrifice, like what matters to them for X amount of time. So so that's what's going on there. That's the haps.
We'll
So
put the links in the show notes too.
Yes, cool. All right, so those are my updates that hopefully came across with my internet issues that I don't understand what are happening, but we're rolling with it.
Who knows? I'll do what I can in editing, in post-production.
I wish you well. All right, you want to tee off today's topic?
Yeah. So if you listened to last week, you know what we're going to talk about. We're going to dive into starting strength training later in life, but this can also apply to starting strength training whenever in life. A lot of what we're going to talk about is exactly the same. There are just some like extra considerations you might want to make if you're a little later in life based on, aging and stuff. Did you want to shout out your bullet point first?
Sure. Yeah.
It's a good place to start.
I wasn't even sure where it would necessarily fall. So what I had jotted down, because I'm going to remind myself what the context was. So I jotted down talking about being able to have strength in quote unquote old age doesn't really hit for the younger generation. It's not something that's tangible. And it becomes more important as you start to take care of or interact with aging parents, even when you, in some cases, are becoming a caregiver. Yeah. So one of the things that was really coming to mind as I was thinking about this particular topic. And then, I started off my updates with talking about being in the retail world outside of coaching. So with coaching, I typically am working with folks that are in their mid late 30s and then up. So it's a very different demographic than who I'm working with primarily when it comes to within the retail management field. I'm typically working with folks that are in their early to mid 20s and then up there. And in some cases, and keep in mind when I'm talking like average, like early to mid 20s, I've also got like some 17, 18-year-olds too floating around. So there's quite a different, I guess we'll call it like starting point with the demographics that I work with from an age standpoint in the two career fields that I have, the two industries that I'm in. And something that was really noticeable as I was kind of thinking about this topic is when I'm talking to someone who's within like the psychographic and the demographic that I serve from a fitness standpoint, it can be easier for that conversation about the importance of focusing on strength and building muscle being a piece of the longevity puzzle when you're somebody who is, let's say, closer to 50 than when I'm having a conversation. And when I say closer to 50, I mean you're either like approaching or have already hit that point around 50 versus when I'm having that conversation with when I'm talking to a 20-year-old about the importance of building muscle and having strength as you age, they're looking at me like, yo, bro, what are you talking about? Like, I'm still on my parents' car insurance, bro. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm still on my parents' health insurance. Like, legit, most of them are. They're like, I'm still on my parents' health insurance. So why would I be, concerned about that? So I think that that was just something that really stood out to me because I think that when you are I'd say starting like in around like your 30s and then going like 40s, like I'm in my mid 40s and then having conversations with folks that are in my peer group and then going into 50s and then 60s, those are the time frames I think where talking about the importance of having muscle and strength as you age and the importance of function, that's something that's tangible either because they're starting, and I should say we, because I'm in my mid 40s at least, like we're starting to notice perhaps people within our peer group who may have declining health or may start to, that's, that the whole, I was going to say age old joke, but that's definitely not a pun I want to use right now. But there's like the running theme of, somebody's like, yep, I slept wrong and now like like my back threw out my back by sleeping wrong or whatever it may be. I guess this is 40 and whatnot. And I'm like, that's a different version of 40 than I'm living and many of my clients are living, but okay. But, within our peer group, that's something that maybe you're starting to see. And also, and this is something that I'm experiencing, you're also perhaps, if you're blessed enough to still have your parents there, you're witnessing just the effects of growing older. You're noticing because you have those memories of your parents like during certain decades, and then now you're just noticing maybe they don't move quite as fast. Maybe they don't, things are not quite as easy for them and things like that, so those things are tangible. So it's, especially when it's your parents that you hopefully were able to at least grow up with, you're noticing it's just different, right? Versus, kids that are in their early to mid 20s may not necessarily, like, it doesn't quite hit for them. So that's something I wanted to just share also when having this conversation about like the importance of having strength and muscle as someone does get older. So I think aging is a little bit different than getting older, but I think I think that's something just to kind of keep in mind, like trying to convince somebody who's 25 that, hey, I just want to make sure that you can age gracefully. That ain't it. That is not it. So yeah, that was my opening my opening soapbox for this particular topic. Do you want to talk just a little bit? You want to share a little detail around where this topic came from, also?
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't listened to last week, 2 weeks ago, we don't do weekly.
Yeah.
Last episode, my mom submitted some questions to us around last week. Last time we talked about the difference between a physical therapist and personal trainer. What else did we talk about? She had a few questions around strength training adjacent topics, and one of them was around like getting into strength training, or I kind of made it into getting into strength training, which is why we made it its own episode for today, because we could go a lot deeper than, I think we covered like 3 different questions last time. Yeah, finding a trainer who's knowledgeable about the things prevalent to you. We spent quite a bit of time there, which is like a precursor to this, because if you are able to and you're starting strength training, I think especially later in life, if you can go see someone in person to help you with like form and movement before you start throwing weight around and lifting heavier, that can be really helpful. Also for anyone starting strength training, if you're like not as confident or comfortable just starting yourself, and just want someone to help guide you and just make sure you're, doing things correctly. Because I know for people of any age, getting injured is a big fear when starting strength training, especially with those who are on social media. There's a lot of fear mongering around very safe exercises, like deadlifting. You're going to hurt your back is a thing I've seen so much. Things like that. Don't squat with your knees going past your toes, stuff like that. So going to someone who's knowledgeable just as you're starting out can be really helpful. In person, which JK has talked about quite a bit on the trainer side. And then we touched a little bit about lifting weights as we age, but now we're going to fully dive in more. So that's where this came from, because I am trying to convince my parents to lift some heavy weights, basically.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to link this in the show notes, but I have a lot of bullet points from a paper. I think it's a paper or an article. There's a lot of references in it, so I think it's a paper. But it's from the NSCA, which, for anyone who's not aware, that's the National Strength and Conditioning Association, which is a very credible body for strength training. They do the CSCS, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist course that I went through in 2021. Anyway, so they have a paper, and it's called Resistance Training for Older Adults. And I think it's really helpful. To be honest, I didn't read the whole thing. It's a lot, but I did skim it.
I didn't read it at all.
No, there's a lot of words. But there's some, for anyone who really wants to dive in, the link is in the show notes so you can read it all. There's some really good tables, I think, that are useful, that give you the high level, what you really need to know. And a lot of this applies, like we've been saying, to anyone starting strength training at any point, with just some more specific considerations for if you're older. So one of the reasons strength training is important, or resistance training, I guess I should start saying resistance training, I know you are a semantic fan.
I will happily just accommodate. Let's just put it under one heading and call it a day.
Okay. They use resistance training in the paper.
Yeah,
so we'll say resistance training.
We'll use the terms interchangeably. Call it a day.
Okay, so I'm going to read this one bullet point from the paper. It says, current research has demonstrated that countering muscle disuse through resistance training is a powerful intervention to combat muscle strength loss, muscle mass loss, physiological vulnerability, aka frailty, and their debilitating consequences on physical functioning, mobility, independence, chronic disease management, psychological well-being, and quality of life. So obviously that makes sense why resistance training is really important as you are older. And they didn't mention it in this blurb, but bone density. I guess it goes with frailty, but bone density, I think is a good call out, especially like you were saying for the younger generation. Because like you tell someone in their 20s, like you should resistance train so you're not frail. Like what does that mean? No one thinks of a 20-year-old as frail, right?
Right. Exactly.
But I mean, especially for like females who like maybe you've gone through an eating disorder or disordered eating, like you really need to be thinking about bone density as a female athlete. And 20s are like, I don't remember when the cutoff is, but like the prime bone building time. So for anyone, maintaining or building bone density is really important. And resistance training is a really one of the best ways to do that. So
Yeah.
any notes so far?
No, real straightforward. I mean, transparently, what pops into my head is the question, and I throw out the disclaimer that I'm big on perspective. I'm obsessed with different perspectives and not making general assumptions.
Yeah.
Just because I think a certain way, or because the majority of the interactions that I've had would validate like this particular point of view, that there aren't a large number or percentage of people who think the opposite. I wonder, like say specifically with this particular area, with talking about the benefits of strength training on areas like bone density, perhaps like delaying the effects of osteoporosis, sarcopenia, different things like that. I wonder, I'm curious, and this isn't a question that we're going to answer, it's just I'm curious, is this actually an argument that's out there right now that people don't believe that it is important? Like, are there large groups of older people who are like, yeah, it's not that important? It's, you know what I mean?
I think I know what you mean. I don't
know. I'm not really asking the question of like, hey, Kelly, do you think there? It's more of like an internal thing, you know. So I think about having incomplete thoughts. So I think about when I'm trying to present something to somebody. One of the things that I will first start off with, if I'm trying to stress like the importance of something, like I want them to make a change, whether it's like organizationally, we need to make a change. First, we present the case for change. Like, here's the reason that we need to change the current strategy that we have. And same thing with like a person. Like if I'm going to make a presentation to a person, to a client, to say like, hey, you primarily have focused on only doing cardio for literally like the last 5 decades of your life. You have focused on only doing cardio and running, and you've done no strength training. And like, first I would start with the case for change. And the case for change would be trying to help them understand the benefits of muscle. I'm wondering like, I wonder how prevalent it would be that you would need to spend a decent amount of time and energy in convincing someone that having muscle is important to their quality of life. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, like I'm wondering if it falls under the category of I know what to do, I'm just not doing it.
I don't think it's quite that category.
Okay.
I don't think people know what to do. I think people know that they should be doing some sort of resistance training.
We're talking older generation, right?
I'm talking to everyone.
Okay, well, let's make it specific to older generation.
Okay.
Because that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it would be the same.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the challenge with implementing strength training, for lack of a better way to put it, I think that some of the challenge with implementing strength training with the older generation is this underlying belief that it's too late for it to make that big of a difference.
Yeah, I think
I,
that's the
I
big
don't
thing.
know any other more like warm fuzzy way to say it. I
I don't
just
think there has to be a warm, fuzzy way to say it.
okay, cool.
I think that's the reality. And then I think it does, obviously, depending on the person's background and what they've experienced and people around them, I
Yeah,
think it goes along with like then not knowing what to do.
what to do. Okay.
Like, even if someone's super motivated, they go to the gym on their own. I feel like I'm making assumptions here for the older generation, but like, people my age, they once they walk into the gym, they don't know what to do sometimes without direction. Like we've
Yeah.
talked about kind of stuff like that before. Runners I've worked with, they're like, I know I need to strength train, I just don't know what to do. I'm just like, just do something. But I would
Yeah.
guess it's the same. Like, even if they are convinced this will help me, it's not too late for me to get the benefits. Then like the next hurdle is like, okay, how do I start?
Now what do I do? Yeah.
Yeah, especially
You want
because
to?
like there's so much information out there. Walking
Okay.
to a gym can be overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, do you want to transition into that then? Talk about some
Yeah,
ideas for what to do.
yeah. So I'll let you know what the NSCA says, and this
Little
for
side note
those.
here. Little
Yeah.
side note that I'm going to throw in that we're not going to
What?
turn into another topic. I am going to acknowledge that if there are any hardcore old school
Yeah.
ish CrossFitters that are listening to this, they couldn't care less what the NSCA says. Because if I
I'm
remember,
just citing my source.
I I'm not arguing with you. I'm taking a moment to acknowledge the the maybe one person that's listening
Okay.
who's a hardcore CrossFitter that whenever you say NSCA, according to the NSCA, they will turn off any listening because that doesn't hold any credibility. Because if I remember correctly, the NSCA is the organization that lost a lawsuit against CrossFit for
Oh, we did talk
claiming,
about this at
yeah,
some
for
point.
claiming that CrossFit. I don't know that we talked about this one.
We
They lost a
mentioned it.
lawsuit against CrossFit, yeah, claiming that CrossFit was dangerous and a whole bunch of other stuff, and they ended up losing that particular lawsuit. Like they basically
Yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, they kind of like made stuff up in order to try to discredit CrossFit. So I will just acknowledge that particular piece. If there's somebody who's listening who's like, well, just because the NSCA says, so I'm just going to throw that out there.
Okay.
I like, hey, listen, I'm just acknowledging perspectives and I'm bringing in a little controversy, trying to spice things up a
If
little bit.
if that listener has made it this far, I don't know. If you're a hardcore CrossFitter, I don't know. Anyway, as my source says,
See
a
why we get along so well.
properly yeah, a properly designed resistance training program for older adults should include an individualized, periodized approach working toward 2 to 3 sets of 1 to 2 multi-joint exercises per major muscle group, achieving intensities of 70 to 85% of one repetition max 2 to 3 times per week, including power exercise performed at higher velocities in concentric movements with moderate intensities. That was a lot of words.
Yeah, it was.
But basically, it's a lot of what we've said on this podcast a lot. Your
Oh.
program should be individual to you. It should be periodized. Oh my God, I can't say that word. Periodized.
It should go through phases and periods.
It
Phases.
should go through phases. It should progress and
Yeah.
overload. And then they specifically say like 1 to 2 multi-joint exercises per major muscle group. So compound movements, which I'm guessing is just kind of like so you get more bang for your buck.
Multi-joint.
For
Yeah, it makes sense.
because one of the major thing I mentioned this last episode, but one of the major differences or considerations that they recommend that you make for older clients is they need more recovery time because as we age, it takes longer to recover, which is true for everyone. So focusing more on the compound movements, so more than one joint, is a better use of your time when you are not training like 5 to 6 days a week in the gym and doing, all of the accessory movements that you might be doing in your younger generations, like bicep curls. What other ones? Why can I not think of any others? Leg extensions. I guess that could technically be, that's more of a single joint. Things like
I know
that.
what you're saying, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So like veering more on the side of like squats, deadlifts, lunges. A lot of this should sound familiar because it's basically the same information we always say. Yeah. So I think just like if you're an older person starting to go strength train, like just don't go ham right off the bat, which I would also say to anyone starting out with less and then progressing to more as you figure out what you can and can't handle, how sore you get, how long you take to recover is a really good way to go about it. And I do like that they say that you should still be doing power movements as you get older.
Mm-hmm.
And that does include plyometrics, which I don't think we talked about it last time. We talked about it off air. There are, if you look up articles about like how should older adults strength train, they mention jumping a lot because that does help with bone density. And plyometrics are important. Those, just for anyone else, just be careful getting into them because they are very intense compared to, just like a deadlift, a squat.
Yeah.
Jumping is intense, especially if you're not used to it.
So clapping push-ups? No, you're not feeling like that. Okay.
You could do them incline and progress down to the floor.
Yeah. So what is always interesting to me is that a lot of these recommendations are similar to what we would recommend at any age group.
Yeah.
Like a few weeks ago, I did an episode on strength training for kids, and excuse me, and something that I've found is that the recommendations that we typically have for kids, and when I say kids, I'm talking like junior high, high school, and the quote unquote special considerations, like things to really keep an eye out for example, making sure that there's proper attention on form first over load.
Yeah.
So paying attention to how the exercise is being performed, paying attention to movement pattern. So if we've got if we've got a bias more or less towards something, with the younger group, I'm going to bias more towards movement pattern, like squat, than I am going to bias more towards, doesn't mean I'm going to ignore certain things. It's just I'm going to bias more towards, say, developing strength and the ability to squat through a full range of motion with weight than I am, prioritizing quad growth specifically. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I'm in the same thing. And the third thing, would be focusing on proper recovery. Like those are three things just off the top of my head, because I can't remember exactly the ones. I don't have my notes in front of me from the episode I did on my podcast about this. But those three things: proper form, emphasis of prioritizing moving weight through the full range of motion, whether it's overhead pressing, pushing, pulling, rowing, which is pulling, hinging and squatting, over specific muscle groups necessarily. And then third, proper recovery. So making sure sessions are spaced out properly, making sure that we're getting proper sleep, making sure that we're also recovery. To me, walking and light movement outside of your training session is part of the recovery process. Like recovery doesn't mean like go lay on the couch and don't do anything, or like sit in the chair and don't do anything. So I literally would take those same three things and carry them on over 4 decades later and drop them on my 70-year-old client too. Well, that'd be more than 4 decades. But I dropped them on a 70-year-old client too, and who was saying to me, hey, I've been told that, I really could benefit from focusing on some strength training. Where would you suggest? What are 3 areas you would say are the most important things for me? Cool. Well, one, let's make sure that you're doing the movements correctly. Two, we're going to build them. And this isn't like in any order. Two, we're going to build those movements with a priority on making sure that as for long as humanly possible, we can move through the full range of motion. So you're not half pressing like at a 90-degree angle. We're going to get that arm all the way up overhead. And if we can then we're going to put a dumbbell in your hand and you're going to reach it all the way up overhead. Like we're going to prioritize movement patterns. And then we're going to make sure that we also have a plan for what you do after you get done with your strength training session. And I don't mean like just immediately after, the space, that gap between your Monday workout and your Wednesday workout. So what does movement look like throughout the day? Like that sort of a thing. So that's, all right. Well, that's our episode for today. Like we basically those things. I would say though, and this was something that I was talking with you about before we hit record, I would, if I'm designing a program for somebody who is specifically, let's say like right now, I actually have a client who's in their, I think she is 60. So I think she's in her early 60s and dabbled in some resistance training, which was more like, I want to say she did Orange Theory for like a little bit. And when I say a little bit, I mean less than 6 months, I think. But just really had dedicated the majority of her like from first child to now the kids are all like in their mid to late 20s, I think, at this point, and 30s, 20s and 30s, I want to say at this point. So now it was time for her to focus on herself and her being the priority and things like that. And so what she wanted to do was build strength. And so what we've primarily focused on has not specifically been about, how can we get you like super jacked biceps and really cap delts and really round glutes. It's been around like movement patterns. So while those can be a byproduct of the work that we do, we've really biased towards movement patterns like hinging. She likes to, do a lot of like yard work and moving things around and whatnot, and found that she would routinely get injured doing those things. So like after a hard day of working around the house, it would take like days to recover, right? So we're trying to get out of the habit of saying right. So it would take her days to recover. So that's something that we have focused on is, okay, well, what sort of movement patterns, and this is, if I was talking to your mom, like mom's probably listening right now, I would be asking questions about, so help me understand on an average week, what are some of the activities that you like to do? So if it's working in the garden, if it's going for walks with friends, if it's they like to, play pickleball. I don't know. Like there's random things that they like to do. I first start with, okay, I'm going to help you see different strength-based movements and movement patterns that carry over into the things you do in everyday life. Because right now, those things that they're doing in everyday life, maybe they're getting injured every now and then, or maybe like kind of aches and pains when those certain things happen. Because what happens is then, say if they like to travel a lot, one of the wins that one of my clients had who is more in her 50s, she was like, I have noticed that when I travel, I can actually grab like not only like my suitcase, but also like my partner's suitcase too. Like when he's got like he's got stuff that he's carrying or whatever, like he's no longer having to carry like all of the bags. I can actually contribute. And to some people, they're like, okay, whatever. To that particular client, like that was a big quality of life improvement through strength training. So just a little rant to go on there. Yeah.
I'll give you an example of what they like to do.
Okay.
My parents love hiking. They have poles too. Hiking with poles. And they have to walk upstairs quite a bit. So.
Okay.
Going off of that, what would you give them to start?
Okay, so you said they like hiking?
Love it. hiking,
Okay.
walking. They've
Fantastic.
mentioned wanting to try pickleball, but to my knowledge, it hasn't happened. I'll get
Yeah,
that intel this weekend, but
I'm straight up. I am convinced so far, based on interactions that I've had with my own clients and then others, that
yeah.
pickleball is going to become like the CrossFit of the older generation
Oh, it for
because
sure is.
there's people jumping into it without. Yeah, I'm just saying there's a whole lot of people who are going to be hurting themselves.
I could see that because it's like a combination of
It's like
rotating,
Oh yeah.
tennis,
Uh-huh.
plyometrics, you're hopping around.
Stop start,
Yeah,
lateral
like
movement.
agility stuff.
Absolutely. Yep.
ACLs, oh no.
Uh-huh. Spot on.
Yeah.
Spot
I know.
spot on.
I know about
You
the
are
knees.
spot on. So anywho, okay. So and I know we're gonna be wrapping up here very shortly. So let's
Yeah.
say, okay, so Mama Klutz is listening, right? And so
Yeah.
they like to
Oh,
go
and
hiking.
she loves hiking, and
Okay.
part of what we mentioned last episode, she has osteopenia,
Yeah.
which obviously resistance training very good for helping build that bone density,
Yeah.
because osteopenia is on the way to osteoporosis, if I have that correct in my brain.
I believe you are correct.
Yeah, I
I
think
can't remember what like
osteoporosis
the
is
order that it
the
goes
worst
in.
one.
But
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then obviously as you're aging, if you have osteopenia or osteoporosis, if you fall, you have a much higher risk of breaking a bone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially with like liking to hike. That's, even higher risk.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is strengthening the the muscle groups that support a lot of that climbing and hiking. So if we're talking about being able to take those single steps, so step ups are obviously like that's a no brainer to me. It should be a no brainer, I
Yeah.
think. So we've got step ups, but what I would actually be focusing on is not just step ups, but step downs. So, say if we're starting with a platform or a box, and I think that's something to keep in mind too, that when we're talking about particular things, like earlier you were talking about, which I totally agree with you, the benefits of still doing some power movements and some plyometrics. Sometimes it's easy to think, okay, when you say plyometrics, and I jokingly said like clapping push-ups, right? There are
Yeah.
more options out there than just clapping push-ups.
Yeah.
So, you know, for example, if we're talking going back to the example of doing like step ups and step downs and things like that, I think that when you're somebody who's doing a decent amount of like climbing and hiking, or yeah, let's mostly say like incline hiking, then
Yeah.
it's easier to focus on force production. So if you think about it, like I'm going to put one foot on a step and I'm going to then step up. Also, what tends to get neglected is being able to handle force absorption. So stepping down. So I would actually do movements like standing on top of a box or a platform, whatever height you want to start with, and have dumbbells in both hands, like a dumbbell in each hand, and then step down. So step like right foot down and then step it right back up, and then left foot down and then step it right back up. So you're just trying to control that back leg that's going down to the ground. So work on force absorption. So that can start to work like both the anterior and posterior chain. So I do like step ups and step downs. If I have access to resistance bands, like what are commonly referred to as like mini bands or booty bands, then I do like monster walks where you have the resistance band around the legs, either above the knee or mostly like above the knee. Then I would do like some lateral shuffles too. So being able to create some resistance that way. I'd also be working on hips too. So I would do some hinging. So does it mean that we need to pull out like a 350-pound barbell and start deadlifting? Not necessarily. I think that being able to build strength in the hips is vitally important. Like, I don't know how many times I've just heard the story of somebody, fell and broke their hip, and they fell and broke
Yep.
their hip. And then that was basically kind of like the thing, like that was like the catalyst for then like moving less than they already were. And then the ball starts rolling. So I
Yeah.
would say, being able, I would look at it like being able to work on movement patterns that have you step up, step down, move left, and move right. Almost like I used to call it like the gaming controller pattern, like
Yeah.
up, down, left, right, and then backwards. So even like walking backwards with like weights in their hands, farmers carries, just being able to move in different directions. And then your basic like squatting. So first sitting down to a box, like sitting on a box or sitting in a chair with
Yeah.
dumbbells down at their sides, and then standing up from the chair.
Yeah.
So starting in the seated position and then standing up, I think is a big one. Is a big one that I would work on too. And then of course I would not neglect upper body in any way, shape, or form. Like we're definitely going to do some upper body work, right? So I think that any sort of like raising, for anybody who's not watching the video, I'm like raising my arms, like raising arms up overhead, and then slowly lowering back down. I think that the longer that we can help folks maintain overhead mobility and overhead range of motion, and then being able to hold some weight as they reach up overhead, then I think the better off they're going to be. So I think those are just some things that just come to mind, but especially if they'd like to spend a decent amount of time hiking, like if they really love stuff like that, I would work on those movement patterns of stepping up and stepping down, being able to absorb that force, and then also not sleeping on like moving left and moving right, especially like resistance bands, like shuffle to the left, shuffle to the
Yeah.
right. Goblet hold, you could do goblet hold too, goblet hold walks, different things like that. So those are probably some of the main things that I would really really focus on.
Yeah. That makes sense.
This is the stuff I like to nerd out on. In case you could not just tell, I'm like all about it. Yeah.
Yeah. The case studies are fun. The only other thing I want to mention from my source is that especially for those with osteopenia or osteoporosis, is that working on balance is really important, which like
Oh yes.
in the exercises you mentioned, like step ups also cover balance. But that just helps if you're a fall, like, so you have less of a fall risk. So like unilateral one-legged exercises are really good. So the step ups, lunges, just standing on one leg. That's actually a really good test of your balance. Stuff like that. Especially as we get older, or for anyone who, is a little clumsy.
Yes. A movement that I like, this just popped into my head too when you mention, like when I think about function and being in a position to help yourself if something were to happen. That's where I think something like a modified up down, very similar to a burpee. And I know that people like hate burpees and think that they're stupid and whatnot. I think there is benefit to doing some movement patterns that reinforce your ability to get yourself up off the floor. So
Yeah.
even if you have a box or a bench that's in front of you and you put both hands on the bench, like you bend down like you're gonna do a push up on the bench, then put both feet out so you're almost in a plank position with your hands on the bench, and then you walk both feet forward and then stand up. Stuff like that. Like basically it's called an up down. If you look up downs, you can do like a modified up down. I think that I think that having some sort of movement like that in there where you are working on things like push-ups and things like that, but that ability to use your hands to be able to support your body to get up, I think that that's something that can be really really key too. Something that I think, depending on how specific you really like need to get, I think things like being able to always work on pulling strength is important too, because
Mm-hmm.
if we're talking about like really like folks who are in their like upper tier of age. So let's say like I encountered a gentleman that was in his mid 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and just based on different surgeries and things like that he had had, he really didn't have a whole lot of ability to add any strength to his lower body. It wasn't quite chair bound, and also just it wasn't feasible for him to do a whole lot lower body wise.
Mm.
However, because he had focused on he told me he had this regimen of always doing like a lot of pull-ups. He was like super old school guy. So he always
Yeah.
liked to do a lot of pull-ups and whatnot and chin-ups and all this other stuff. What he was able to do is he's able to hold on to something and lift himself out of his chair underneath his own power.
Mm.
And even though he doesn't have a whole lot of use, again, with his lower body, he can move himself along like railings and stairs and things like that because he's
Yeah.
like freakishly strong upper body, like freakish. One of those dudes, like you shake his hand and you're like, yes, sir, like that sort of thing. So those are different things that I think also can play a role. So I think that's what I would throw out there too, is the importance of being able to link the strength movements that you're doing to things that you're doing in everyday life.
Yeah.
So the putting your suitcase in the overhead compartment as you go on your 5th vacation of the year because you're retired and you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
The farmer's carry because you're carrying stuff back and forth
Yeah.
as you do whatever, like things like that. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Good motivation.
Or,
Yeah.
yeah, other examples for those who don't go on trips and lift stuff overhead. Picking up the grandbabies and throwing them up overhead. Maybe not throwing them, but
Yeah. Yeah.
My brother
absolutely.
is about to have a baby next year, so
Oh,
there will be a
snap.
grandbaby.
Yeah. Yeah. Even squatting down to play with kids is
Yeah.
something that's pretty awesome too. I remember taking Mace to a park like a few years ago to play catch, and it was when he was learning how to pitch. So I had to squat down to play catcher for him. And I remember he made some sort of a comment. I had asked him, like, hey, what do you want to do while we're at this park? Because we were killing some time. And he's like, I want to pitch. And he's like, are you okay though if I do that? Because you're gonna have to squat down to catch. And I was like, I don't know who you think you are. But I mean, I was like, really? You just okay? Gotcha. And I think that had been a leg day too, so my legs were kind of sore. But I was like, I'm not letting him
No,
get
you
away
can't
with that
break.
one. Yeah. So I was like, I basically like almost sat down on the ground. I was squatting so low. Yeah. So yeah, being able to do things like that, I think is really helpful. So.
Yeah. And then the last thing I just want to mention is if you're just getting into strength training, I would start with like mostly body weight stuff just to assess how things feel, how you're moving. But don't be afraid to go up in weight. And especially for my older women, I know that Tracy Anderson said we only had to lift 3-pound weights in each hand, but please go up higher than that. Like, don't be afraid to get up into the 20s, 30s, maybe 40s and 50s. Who knows?
Cool.
Depending on what exercise you're doing.
Tracy Anderson.
Yeah.
We'll throw that one to Claire. Let her handle that. Yeah.
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 But yeah.
We should do that when the new podcast release. We should ask, hey, when's Tracy Anderson going to be on? Since they're going to have like more of a fitness spin to it, or, like wellness and whatnot, we should spam them with requests to bring on Tracy Anderson.
It
See
would
how that
be
goes.
an interesting conversation with those two and her.
I do not feel like that would go well.
Probably not.
I don't.
But
I'd tune in and
I'd
eat
tune in.
popcorn while I watched.
yeah, exactly.
All right.
All right. Well, we
Cool.
hope this was a helpful episode. I
Certainly
will get
do.
feedback if it was or was not, as my parents listen. So, but
Shout
if
out
you
Mom and
would
Dad
like
Clubs.
to, shout out mom and dad. If you would like to give us feedback, you can do so by leaving us a rating and review. You can leave a comment on this episode on Spotify or YouTube. wherever you're watching, if you're watching. And you can also DM us on Instagram at Lifting, Run, and Living Pod. Or if email is your thing, we have an email, liftingrunninglivingpod@gmail.com.
Yes.
And that's it.
That is all. All right. And I'm going to throw in one more plug just in case. Make sure you check the show notes.
Yes.
If you're interested in checking out the Reset program, I would love to have you.
Or if you're a big NSCA fan and want to read this paper.
Anyways, listen, I was trying to represent the people. All right, folks. Thanks for listening to another episode of Lifting, Running, and Living. Take care, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.